All right, it's 3 o'clock, so it's going. All right, so hello, I'm Chris Vandyke. I'm founder and president of Skullgate Media, and welcome to the Self-Publishing a Novel panel that we're doing here as part of IBEON Con. And just a little about us before we get going. Skullgate Media is a young independent writing collective that's all about bringing artists together to collaborate on speculative fiction projects. Today's panel, however, is less about how those projects are created and instead about how we share our projects with other people. As difficult as it is to write a novel, in some ways that's the easy part. Anyone who's ever written a book has had friends and family ask, so are you going to publish it? For this year, that means finding an agent and trying to land a book deal with a big publisher, but today's print-on-demand services have made it possible so almost anyone with a bit of hard work and determination can skip that traditional route and publish their books on their own. It sounds easy, but as someone who's done it myself, publishing your book is not as simple as it sounds. Today's panelists have a variety of self-publishing experience of their own books, and be that a recent debut novel or a fantasy series. So let's start by having everyone introduce themselves and their publishing experience, especially because on cue it seems that horrible banging noise has finally stopped, which I think was going on during my entire introduction, but that is the fun of live streaming. Maybe we could just go around. I don't know if everyone's the same as on my screen, but I'll just go to my, I think that's my right, my left. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit? Again.
Yeah, I'm B.K. Bass. I am an author of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I have 12 books published, and also am appearing in 7 different anthologies this year, 4 of them from Skullgate Media.
All right, Rue, let's move across the screen and let's go backwards to you.
Yes, I'm Rue Sparks. I have 2 books published. One is Daylight Chasers, which is a novella. I have a short story collection, The Stars Will Guide Us Back, and then a mystery novel, The Fable of Wren, which is coming out in October. I write primarily speculative fiction and magical realism.
Awesome. All right, let's drop down to Jayme.
Hi, I'm Jayme Bean. I am the author of Untouched. It's my debut novel. That is all I have published for myself, although I do have 2 stories in 2 Skullgate Media publications, one coming out this upcoming week and then one that came out a few months ago.
Awesome. And Audrey.
I am A.R.K. Horton or A.R.K. Horton. Either one is fine. I write speculative fiction. I wrote the Telverin trilogy. Last book came out in July. And I've actually been in 3 different anthologies this year, 2 of them with Skullgate.
Awesome. Yeah, so, and again, as I said at the top, I'm Chris Vandyke, founder of Skullgate Media, which a few people have mentioned already, which is partially why I grabbed them all together. I'm a writer based out of Brooklyn, New York, and over the last few years, most of my publishing experience has been from the point of view as a small press, publishing other people's stuff through Skullgate, and I've helped a number of books through publication, but I also have a series of self-published cyberpunk novellas, which was how I got my feet wet with the publishing world. And so everyone here on this panel does have books that are available for publication, and there will be links for those and links to their websites in the show notes when we're done. And if there's anyone has any questions for them, we do have the live comments going over there, and I'd be happy to throw some of that into the mix. So let's get started. So the first question I have: today, when you finish a book, you pretty much face the big decision of traditional publishing or self-publication. And what raises the stakes somewhat, people here have been trying to publish a book, is that if you self-publish your book, you're essentially closing the door on ever selling it to a traditional publisher, as literary agents aren't usually interested in representing previously published works. Like we all hear, there's all those exceptions, which everyone knows about, but generally, if you self-publish a book, it is not going to be traditionally published. So just for anyone who wants to start, I'm interested, what made you decide to go the self-publishing route rather than to go the traditional route of querying agents and trying to get a book deal for your work?
I can go. I decided to self-publish because I wanted a little bit more control over my story. I was a little worried that it would be forced into a certain box with the characters and the story the way I had it. So for me, it was kind of easy to just decide to do it myself. Plus, I like to do things myself to begin with. Not opposed to querying, but I also have a toddler. And so trying to do things on somebody else's deadline is not super easy.
Yeah, there's also a control thing for me. I definitely wanted full control over everything, and also the time frame. Instead of finishing a book and then going through the querying process and waiting, maybe even another 2 years after it's accepted for it to come out. I've gotten 12 books out in the last 3 years. So getting content out there, I just don't want to wait that long process. Basically the clock is ticking. So I want to make things happen.
Actually, I initially was researching traditional publishing. And when I was doing that research, I discovered that one of my favorite authors, Rachel Aaron, is self-published. And you just not know because the products are just phenomenal. She writes great books and great packages, and she makes enough to, feed her family, keep a roof over her head. So I started looking into self-publishing, and for me, it checked a lot of boxes that applied to my passions. I enjoy running a business. I enjoy doing marketing. I enjoy working with vendors. I like doing all of that. And to me, getting my story out there was more important than getting a publisher to validate my book.
I actually did query the third book that I'm publishing, The Fable of Ren, for a while, and what I found was that the more feedback I got, the less I was the more I was losing sight of what I wanted to do with the book. The less it was becoming the book I wanted it to be. So at the end of the day, it was choosing the book I wanted to tell over the book that would have sold. So it became the books I want to write aren't marketable to a traditional publisher.
Right.
Like that's what it comes down to, and that's okay with me. Like I'll self-publish if that's what it takes. So.
Right. And then, yeah, it's sort of ironic. You'll often look at, everyone can point to these great big bestsellers that break every single rule that agents are looking for. But then when you go to query your book, you're told, it has to be this exact word count. It has to fall into this exact pattern. So for my answer, I guess I'm trying all of the above. I have self-published a few of my own books. I do have a young adult sci-fi romance time travel story that I am still querying, and I also do have a book coming out through a small indie publisher that I went directly to with a manuscript as opposed to an agent, which is sort of the third route. There are some small publishers you don't need an agent for, like Skullgate Media. And I guess the difference for me when I think of self-publishing querying, the fact is, querying is exhausting and frustrating, even apart from if people want to. Most of the time, agents haven't asked me to change my book because they don't bother to respond to my queries in the first place, or you just get a generic letter back. And it's very disheartening spending an hour a week sending letters to people and then not getting a response. And statistics are also just not in your favor. Like, the bottom line is, it isn't a choice between, it isn't always just a choice of, am I going to be self-published or traditionally published? Because there is an element of luck, I believe, with traditional publishing. It is, good books, querying all the hard work and all that, stuff we like to talk about. But just statistically speaking, when agents have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of queries in their inbox, there's some luck involved too. And as Audrey said, at some point, if you want your story out there, you can do it yourself these days. So I've still got some I'm holding out for, but maybe it's just because I want that external validation. I haven't decided why. I think part of me would love to have a letter from someone saying, I love your book so much, but we'll see. And I did actually, my novellas, I specifically wrote because I wanted to try out self-publishing. I'd sort of read some articles about it, and I said, hey, I want to write something that I think I could self-publish. And so I was like, let's try these out. So when I wrote my first novel, next question, I guess, I assumed it was just for me, and I didn't think about publishing it. And I'm sure a lot of people who didn't plan on being authors per se did that. Like I was writing my book, friends would go, "Are you going to publish it?" I go, "Nah, it's just my project." And then I was like, "Oh my God, I got a book. I should do something with it." So since then, however, I've done a lot of research on what sells. And this sort of goes to like maybe what Rue was saying. Like there's a lot of things that people say, this is what you need to do. Word counts, specific genres, writing pitches or book, beat sheets and 3-act structures. And as much as that's part of selling a book to a publisher, as a self-publisher, do you think at all about a book that's going to sell while you're writing it now? Because as Audrey, you mentioned being a businesswoman, or is it merely just, it's the art, I'm going to tell the story I want, and then when I'm done, I'm going to figure out how to sell it? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. There's no judgment in that question. I'm just wondering, as a self-published author, is selling your book something you think of when you write, or is that something you deal with when the story is told?
I think that when we're talking about marketability, there's a difference between going to a traditional publishing route and trying to make it marketable that way, because they're looking at what's marketable for big audiences, what the really big trends are, because they're going to put a lot of money in this and they need something that's going to appeal to as many people as possible. When you are self-publishing, you can write a book for a niche audience, and it'll do great. It could do wonderfully. You could make a lot of money off of that because you're getting all of the royalties. But I come from a copyright background. I come from a marketing background, so marketability is always in the back of my mind. With my first trilogy, I really wasn't thinking about that to begin with. In the beginning, I was just thinking about the story I wanted to write. And as I started writing it, I started thinking about my readers. Instead of thinking about, will this sell, I started thinking, how am I going to leave my readers at the end of this book? What moments are they going to enjoy? So if you think about it from that perspective, a selfless perspective, really, if you're not thinking how much money can I make off of this, but rather how happy can I make somebody with this book, or sad, because some people really like that. Or
they could be the same thing. They could be the same thing. Happy, sad.
But, how can I entertain my reader and make them think and make this an enjoyable experience for them? Those go hand in hand. So I think if you're thinking about the reader, it helps a lot with marketing.
Yeah, that's pretty much my big aim is when I'm in the writing process, I'm not thinking that much about marketing. I'm just thinking about the quality of the story. And I know that down the road, that's going to, help the end result anyway. But telling the story is the most important thing for me in that part of the process.
I can't say I thought too much about it at all. I just wrote what I wanted to write and tried to have it be as cohesive as possible. And if people liked it, then that's just a really happy bonus.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Jayme. Like I come from the perspective of there's a reader for every book. It's the trick is finding the readers, but you also have to make sure that you're doing the best thing for the book itself. Like make sure that you're making it the best iteration of that story that you can, that you're not just throwing it to the wind and like, I don't care about story structure or anything like that. Like you still have to make it good, but like make sure that it's a story that you love at the same time.
Yeah. I like Audrey's sort of point there with indie publishing, right? Success can mean something very different than if it's Tor or Bantam putting the book out. Like I'm sure any of our sales numbers that would be beyond our wildest dreams would be considered a failure by Doubleday Press, right? So like if I sold 10,000 copies of my book, I would like go dancing naked down the street tomorrow, whereas that would be some agent would lose their job for having bought that book and only sold 10,000 copies. So it is, I think I like the idea that you can find a small niche audience, and that might be your goal as an indie author, is finding the audience rather than finding the book to sell. So far this has been sort of abstract thinking about us as, sort of how we're thinking about books and publishing. But I wanted to just get some logistics in case anyone watching this or listening is interested, like someone you've written a book and you're like, this is my first time, what do I do? So if someone had no idea how to go about self-publishing, as people who've all put some books out, what advice would you give them? What are some of the first steps that you would tell someone who is saying, hey, I just wrote a book, I'm thinking of self-publishing it? What are some thoughts or advice?
The biggest thing you can do starting off, first time around, is just do a lot of research. Look up as many resources as you can. Find out what other people are doing. Ask around. The community. Everybody's really helpful. Don't try to just jump in feet first without knowing what you're doing. Find out as much as you can and have a plan before you start.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Obviously, reach out to as many resources as you can, whether that be Google sites that have reputation. A.R.K and I were on a panel yesterday where we talked about trusting your resources, which I couldn't agree with more, is make sure that it's not something that's sponsored. Make sure it's something that has experience behind it. So if you're looking something up or you're reading, even if it's something like, oh, I want to look at agents just in case, look at what they've put out, look at everybody's websites, look at programs, set up cost parameters for yourself. It's very in-depth to go through the process, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, but if you want it done well and done right, take the time to really go through and make sure that each step is exactly how you want it and that you are doing it in a way that's going to not only present your work in the best way, but something that is manageable for yourself.
Yeah, thinking about that conversation yesterday, it's so funny. After we did that panel, I was on Facebook in one of my writer groups, and this author, remember how I said there's not much transparency in publishing? She posted about how there's not much transparency in publishing. So to back up her advice, which was really good advice, by the way, I can't really succinctly wrap it up here, but she showed screenshots of her sales for last year, like what her 2020 sales were, how that year ended up, and she did really, really well. So it is definitely something that you can make a living off of. So yeah, definitely research who you're getting the advice from. Some of them have this like, I look so successful face on, and that means that they're a very successful actor. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're a very successful author. But like you have people like Brandon Sanderson, who just puts his lectures at BYU on YouTube for free. There you go. Free writing advice from one of the most successful people in the industry. So I would definitely look at that. And then also, when you're first thinking about self-publishing, you really got to ask yourself what it is you want out of it. Because a lot of people start self-publishing because they just want an easy way to publish their book. It seems really easy because all you have to do is upload some files and click some buttons. But it's a business. So if you don't have the right reasons for doing it, you're going to work really, really, really hard and then find out that may not have been the path you really wanted to take. So think about what reasons you want to self-publish. If it's about having more creative control, it's a really good reason to self-publish. If it's love of the publishing process, really great reason. One of my reasons for continuing is just because I really loved the cover art that my cover artist did. And I knew if I went traditional, I would not get to choose that. So there are really legitimate reasons. But if it's about ease, there's no easy path to publication, not successful publication. And the chances of you being successful are about even in both routes. So whichever route you take, just make sure it's the one that aligns with what you want.
And to get a little more on the technical side, because coming from a graphic design background, that's like where I tend to lean into. when you're looking at how you want to approach like how you do your formatting, how you do your book covers, how you do all of that, I think the realistic thing is to um for one, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty and do things on your own, but be realistic about what you are good at and what you are not good at. If you know that you are terrible with visuals, hire someone to do the cover. But if you are good with visuals, do your like homework and you can do it on your own. But do your homework and do it right. Like what Jayme said, like make sure you're getting the right resources, make sure you look into copyright on photography and things like that. So do your due diligence on copyright and photos and illustrations and things so you don't get into an issue later on. That's a big thing that you see around. But as far as like formatting and things like that, I use like Adobe InDesign for mine, and I've not really had an issue. And I use Photoshop for the covers, and then yeah, like there's like a whole slew of like Smashwords and Draft to Digital to choose from. Do your homework on each of them to figure out like which works for you. So
Thank you. Muted myself. I'm a good host, and I didn't know how to do that, and then I forgot to unmute myself. All right, yeah, so that's great. We're going to get into some nitty gritty of some programs in a second. So yeah, I mean, I agree with what I think Audrey said. You know, the first thing is sort of why are you self-publishing? I guess my slightly different take would be, you know, if you just want to do it as a vanity project, that is honestly fine. It can be a hobby. Writing can be a hobby, but it's like be honest with why you're doing it. You know, and that could be, and there's also other options. Like if you just want to print up 10 copies to give your family and friends, I have books that I have not done through Kindle print on demand that I've just put on, my lane just brain. You know, I've just printed up 10 copies to give people because it's like, I don't want to sell this yet. I don't want to publish it, but I want to share it with my friends and family. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do as well. I mean, if you just want to put stuff up, go for it. If you want to make a living at it, like what is your goal and why you're doing it? Because that is going to change. Just like if you're a musician, are you playing the guitar because it helps you relax at night? Are you hoping to get a gig? Are you hoping to quit your job and go on tour? Like those are three very different goals, and you're going to want to approach them differently. Also, as people have said, you know, do your research. I do find if you're not already the Twitter writing community, the reason I joined Twitter is I wrote my novel. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm researching agents. And someone said, you should join Twitter. I'm like, I don't like Twitter. I'm not going to join Twitter. And they said, no, you should join Twitter to learn about writing. And I did. And it's honestly one of the best decisions I've ever made in terms of my own writing, because the writing community is awesome. There are its share of little jerks lurking the edges. But in general, the writing community will trip over themselves to give you advice. I have had complete strangers read my query letters. I've had complete strangers offer to beta read for me. I've met everyone who's on this panel via Twitter. You know, I have had books published and anthologies that I've created and been part of because of Twitter. So if you're listening to this and you're not on Twitter, I understand. But even if you only want to get on to talk to other writers, it's a great resource. And that's where you can say, hey, I want to self-publish my book. What should I do? And people, well, you'll have to ignore every single DM you get from some stupid person who tells you that they will help you sell your book. You delete all those and then pay attention to the people who are actually giving you some good advice.
I'll piggyback that for a second and just say, even though people will jump at the chance, because people will, I've met some incredible people, still take everything with a grain of salt and don't think that everybody is a professional and has the best advice. So I've had people I had, I think, like 12 beta readers for my novel, and some had phenomenal feedback. Some had really sketchy feedback that clearly it was not for them. They weren't the right audience. But don't feel like you need to take everybody at face value right out the gate. So you will find your people. It might take a while, but you'll find your niche, and you know, just be wary of certain people, but it is the best resource that you could have for people.
A good caveat as always.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of people on Twitter saying, what good is this app? I don't sell books through this app. I hardly sell anything on Twitter, but it's I would not call Twitter the place where you sell your books. I would call Twitter the place where you network with similar people who write books, maybe in your genre, maybe not. I know that especially with the Skullgate anthologies, the relationships we've made have been enormously helpful to me. I've definitely grown as a writer. I've learned a lot about publishing in general. So go into it knowing that. Because again, people tend to hear, if you're a writer, go on Twitter and think, oh, I'm going to go on Twitter and be wildly successful and make lots of money because people are going to buy my books and then they leave because they're upset. It's not for that. It's like a networking event, but 24/7 and online.
Yeah. Actually, and so getting to some specific things, Rue mentioned some programs she used, and above there's a question. Steve said, what self-publishing options have you appreciated using? So I guess putting those together, what are some websites or software that you would think are essential to a self-published author? There's the big obvious answers like, Kindle KDP, but just what are some, and they could be the obvious answers or the less obvious, what are tools that you use, websites or programs that have been essential for you in your self-publishing journey?
I really have enjoyed using Vellum for formatting. It's really user-friendly and it has a lot of customization, not as much customization as you're going to find if you are proficient in designing programs like InDesign, because InDesign is generally what book formatters use, where you can kind of do each line the way that it should be done. But if you read up on formatting, there's things, like orphans and widows, of where your words are supposed to end on a paragraph, on a page, on a section break. Vellum will let you do most of that without too much of an issue, but it allows you to do it on your own without having to hire somebody to format your book. If you want it to look really nice on the inside, you can just run it through the KDP Create Space program and it'll throw some things on there. But you can go through and really make it look indistinguishable from anything that you would find on the shelf in a bookstore. And then as far as free programs to help you in general, Canva is great for marketing materials, for website things. You can make just about anything, social media posts, website, graphics. And then I use WordPress for my website. And I highly recommend a customizable website that you can make stand out, because sometimes that makes the difference between looking like a professional and looking like somebody just threw something on LiveJournal. Is that a thing anymore, LiveJournal? MySpace,
I have to second Vellum. I would sing about it if we had time. I get told all the time that the interior of my book is beautiful. And I'm like, thank you. I spent 30 minutes on my laptop watching TV doing this because Vellum makes it so easy, as long as you know what images and breaks that you want and what kind of font. And it makes it so easy. And I do some design in my job, so it's not that I can't do it. But when you're doing everything, it is anything that makes it easier. Please take it. Canva is great, but I also recommend BookBrush for marketing. I use that a lot. They do some really great 3D book like cover things. Like you can make it look like your book is at a beach or something like that. I also would say BookFunnel again, because you can send your book the way it would look on an e-reader to any of your beta readers, A.R.K readers, and it makes it extremely easy for them. You can join newsletter promos. I'm joining a promo in a couple of days. Free books that feature badass heroines, and that is going to be my way of getting new readers that like my kind of books to read my trilogy. It is a really great resource. And if you're going wide, I am really enjoying Barnes & Noble as a platform. I just recently started doing it because I just recently went wide. Initially, I was just going to do everything through Ingram Spark and Draft Digital. But somebody told me to try out Barnes & Noble. And, they have like tabs for promotion that don't cost you anything. You just say, hey, I'm promoting a discount on my book at this time. And they'll send it out there because it makes them money when you make money. But that all comes down to research. If you're planning on publishing on a certain platform, research what their promotion options are. Not everything is pay to play.
So that's when we talk about Barnes & Noble. You're distributing, like you're posting the book through the Barnes & Noble distribution, self-publishing, instead of doing like Draft Digital or Smashwords, which you do distribute to Barnes & Noble, but you're doing it directly through them, and you find that difference.
I use Draft Digital for other places like libraries, Kobo.
Right.
I'm actually thinking about going direct to Kobo as well, based on the research I've done. But for Barnes & Noble, I go straight through Barnes & Noble now. I make more money off of my books doing it that way. And also their platform's really easy to use. And like I said, if you go through them, they're more likely to help you promote it because they make more money than if you go through somebody else.
Right.
I will say one thing that's very much not considered and should be more prominent is audiobooks. There's Findaway is a way to distribute, but you can also use ACX directly. I would not recommend using ACX or Findaway if you can avoid it as far as recording the audiobooks, because it is very pricey. You can find great narrators on like Fiverr. That's where I went, and I found Michael and Sky, who did an amazing job for Stars. I did use ACX for Daylight Chasers, and he did an amazing job, but it is a cost share. So that's something that you always have to consider because you're stuck into that contract for, I think, 7 years for that book. So it's like a right thing versus like if you own the audio files, like then you own the rights kind of situation. So it's like just for accessibility alone, like it's a huge thing. I mean, people have the ability to have the ebooks read to them on the e-graders and stuff, but like it's just not the same as like having someone actually perform the audiobook. So definitely, if you can, audiobook all the way. I personally love audiobooks anyway. Like I had like at some point I was driving 3 hours a day for work, so like it got me through so many things. So
I was going to say a few different graphic design softwares you mentioned. I wanted to throw another one out there. What I use is GIMP, which is basically like a free version of Photoshop. I've got a little bit of experience with Photoshop, so I can say they're pretty similar, but I mostly learned on GIMP. I know there's a few limitations to it, but for free software, I've been able to do quite a bit with it. And the other thing I would recommend, I swear by Scrivener. As far as in the writing process, I have recommended Scrivener to people so hard that they think that I'm employed by Scrivener, by Literature and Latte, but I'm not. I just like it that much.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I was gonna say I used Scrivener a lot a while ago. I've actually, this is completely generic, but I moved to doing all my drafting on Google Docs, just because I can have it everywhere. I mean, that's not really a program anyone needs to hear about, but that's where I do all my drafting. And I thought I used Scrivener for my final compilation until I got Vellum, and then like I can co-sign on Vellum has made making my final book so easy that I actually haven't, since I'm doing the drafting on Google Docs and the formatting on Vellum, I haven't used Scrivener as much as I did in between, but I did love that program when I used it. It had a lot of great options for like cork boards and outlining and layout, and it was great for some drafting ideas. In fact, for the people that said Vellum, I do all of Skullgate books on Vellum. As Jayme said, like if you are an InDesign expert, it does have some limitations, much like any user-friendly program does. But short of, if you're not an InDesign person, it's the easiest way. I could not put out as many books as I do through Skullgate if it wasn't for I can drop a Word file into it and then add a header, and oh my God, that looks like a professional book. Like, it is the first time they do have a free demo, and I have to say, if you get the free demo, you will probably end up buying it, because when I had a book 30 minutes after I downloaded the demo, I'm like, I will give you my blood and my tears for this program, so just take my money. And that too, and Rue mentioned finding audio people on Fiverr. Fiverr, I've just found that's where we get our book covers from, artists. I've got a few relationships now with cover artists that I've developed through there. It's a great place, especially when you're getting, the next question was going to be like, art and like where you spend your money. And I found Fiverr has been a great place for me to just find people. I'd love to try to find some audio artists. The idea of books. We do have, Skullgate has a podcast, which is sort of on hiatus now, but we've done some audio fiction, but that's all in-house. An actual audio book I would love to have available as well. And other than that, I think everyone's mentioned all the stuff that I use. I can also co-sign BookBrush is the best way to make just a quick little 3D mock-up. I actually usually will download that, and then I'll throw that into Illustrator, which I have to do sort of more of my graphic design, but just there's no quicker way to just make your book look like it's actually sitting on a shelf. And I do my website through ionos.com. If anyone knows them, they're a web hosting program, and all of our websites are through them, and they are so cheap that I'm sure there's something illegal going on, but since they only charge me like $5 a month, I don't ask questions. All right, so some of those, we've mentioned art there. So print on demand makes self-publishing possible, as you don't need to sink tens of thousands of dollars into an initial book run. Like, 20 years ago, even being a self-published author was a very different project than it is today. But there still are costs involved. I'm sure everyone here has put some of their own money, maybe more than they even want to think about sometimes, into bringing their little book baby to life. So one thing that shocked me when I started was, I'd never having self-published something, I didn't know you had to buy an ISBN number. If you're a Canadian, you get it for free because their government loves people and words and stuff. And in America, there's like a monopoly on it, and you have to go to one company and you have to spend like $80 to get a little number so you can sell your book. And I'm still like outraged by that. But the biggest cost is probably graphics. So you can pay thousands of dollars for custom art and a professionally designed cover, or you can get stock art from $5 and put Comic Sans on it and call it a day. How judging a book by its cover is something we all do, no matter what the cliche is. So just probably, how important was your cover for you? What advice might you have for a self-published author? What sort of budget range? What are the different options that people might have if they're like, I got a book, but I don't just want my nephew's art gracing the cover of it? No offense to your nephew.
I do all my own cover design right now, and I'll use stock art for that, so getting it from somewhere like Shutterstock. And again, I use GIMP for the design. There's a learning curve to it, though. I practiced for quite a while before I really felt like I was good at it. In the past, I've used other cover artists. I've gone through Fiverr, and you can get pretty good results for around $50 a cover on there for the ebook, and then you usually got to pay a little more once you get the print layout if you're going to do paperback or hardback also.
Yeah, looking at, I went through Facebook groups, cover art Facebook groups to find an artist. But when you look at a lot of these pre-mades, I was told by somebody, ooh, pre-mades, but I looked through a lot of pre-mades and they looked exactly like the good stuff you look at when you're scrolling the books in Amazon. So there are some really good pre-mades out there, things that cover artists have done just because they wanted to do it, or they were practicing a new skill or something like that. And the only thing they could do is sell it at this point. So it's a lot cheaper than doing a commission. But that being said, you can commission cover art for a reasonable price. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars on it. My cover artist has always been reasonably priced. I won't say it's $50, but I can definitely budget it in and still be able to make a profit off of my books. So just it's the shop around thing. If anybody tells you you can't get good cover art unless you spend a fortune on it, they don't know what they're talking about, or they're trying to get money out of you. There's a lot of great stuff out there, but also if you're looking for a masterpiece, it might not be, even if it's beautiful, what sells your book. A cover artist is going to know what kind of art, what kind of design makes a reader open a book.
I agree with a chunk of all that. I personally have never used Fiverr for anything other than like personal use. So I haven't used anybody on Fiverr for my book stuff, but cover-wise, I asked around people that had covers that I was interested in and kind of did my research there. My cover was, I think, $200, and that got me ebook, paperback, and hardcover jacket. So it's doable to look around and find different things. I made my cover and then gave it to a cover artist who just put it together to fit the book. But yeah, there's a lot out there. I will say my one biggest piece of advice when it comes to covers is when you have a cover and say you get it from somebody that you've hired, run that through a reverse image search. For the love of God, run it through a reverse image search. I've seen so many books recently that the cover's identical but just tinged a different color. Make sure that you are not having not only the exact same cover as somebody else, but not the same cover in the same genre. You can totally have a similar cover, but one can be fantasy, one can be romance or crime thriller, and they probably won't intersect, but make sure that it's not the exact same market that you're selling it from, because not only will you have the exact same cover as somebody more or less, but now you almost by association look like you have the same book with somebody, or it can be if that person has put out a book and are successful, it might be like, oh, is this next person's book? So you might not even be getting your right audience. But I do think that book covers are incredibly important. I've had more people pick mine up randomly because of the cover than I have because they even looked at the inside of it or read what it was about. They said, I liked the cover and I picked it up because I wanted it on my shelf. And while I would love them to enjoy the book and pick up the book because they want to read it, it's really cool to know that something I made and put together kind of struck somebody artistically. I think that that's really cool.
So in a past life, I was an illustrator, so I do all my own covers. So that makes me a little bit of a unicorn. But so I don't use Fiverr or anything like that. But I will emphasize Jamie's point. Reverse Google image search is your friend for anything you get from anybody that is not you. Not just for that it's not being duplicated, but that they have the rights for it, especially for video. If you get like a book trailer or anything, I've seen people use stuff from like Assassin's Creed and from like other video games. Like it's very easy for people to just like take snippets from other videos or other photos and just throw it in there and say, hey, like without actually having the copyright. So just be very careful that the people you're hiring are within copyright. You just don't want to get involved in a situation. So
yeah, actually on that note, I mean, that I am now doing reverse image searches on the stock art that I personally buy myself, because as people here know that in the most recent Skullgate book, just during the Kickstarter, I put stock art up, and there was a piece of stock art that Shutterstock licensed to me that was actually stolen from Ubisoft from Assassin's Creed. That someone else had sold it to, someone had uploaded it to Shutterstock, and Shutterstock licensed it to me, and I put it, as part of our campaign, and then I got a cease and desist takedown order. Luckily, there's nothing, I took it down, everything was fine, but just because I assumed because I was getting it through Shutterstock that they had, vetted it, and it turns out they hadn't. So yeah, do a reverse.
Assassin's Creed is very popular to steal.
That's what you steal from. I mean, it was a great picture, but probably like you can get such good stock art these days. I didn't think twice about it because the quality of stock art can be as good as, there are some fantastic stock artists out there. Which is also like, if it talks about a budget, again, when we'd said it depends what you want out of your book. When I did my first book, my goal was I wrote a story. I just want to try self-publishing. And so, I did stock art for it, and I do my own cover design. And Have I seen this art on other covers? Yes. This is a very popular stock artist. I've actually seen probably 2 or 3 other cyberpunk books with the same artist. But it didn't really matter to me because I just wanted to try my hand at getting my story out there. And I spent $5 on downloading a stock art picture, and that was the entire budget for my first book. I've definitely, upgraded my budget since then. But again, it's what do you want to do with it? $200 to get a book out there. Even if you make the money, like my dad plays golf, he spends more than $200 a month hitting golf balls around. So whatever your budget is, I think that, again, there are options. And I think for me, when I think of covers, how about do the covers sell? Like there are amazing drop dead covers out there. And there's also the covers that just scream, oh my God, I'm a self-published book. And for me, I think the biggest step is to not fall into that second category. Because there's plenty of, like, I was just pulling off the book on my shelf. One of my favorite author, N.K. Jemisin, one of her book covers. You can't tell me that I probably couldn't have just got this as a pre-made cover for $50. It's a nice cover, but I've seen covers. I mean, this is, 3-time Nebula Award winning, greatest fantasy author of our lifetime. I probably could get this cover for $50 off of Fiverr, right? But what it does do is it's, besides obviously having your name on it, which it could be a blank white sheet and I would buy it if it had N.K. Jemisin's name on it. But this looks like a science fiction or fantasy book that someone would pick up. And so I think that, as Brian said, he does his own covers. You don't have to be an amazing artist, but also, as Rue said, you have to be sort of honest with where your skill set lies. So it's a balance of the two. But I think it doesn't take a lot of skill and practice of looking at covers like this and thinking, I have a free art program. Can I get some stock art and put some fonts on it that look good? You probably can, but also, run it past some other people. If it turns out that your choice of fonts is Comic Sans and you like using the doodle you did at home, maybe you want to get some other people on board to help round out your skill set. So I think it's what do you want to do? What are you good at? And being honest enough with yourself. Because again, I've seen self-published books that sit on the shelf and look just as good or better than this, and then you see ones that you're like, looks like somebody decided to self-publish their book, and that shouldn't be a bad thing, as we're all self-publishing. But you don't want it. You want it to look like you've taken pride in your book, and I think that's for me what the cover does. I've taken pride in this book, and I want it to sit on a shelf next to other books, rather than an afterthought.
I also want to do just one little note. If you do decide to do your own cover, or if you're vetting cover artists, so one thing to consider is there's a balance between having covers that fit in the genre and having a cover that stands out. Like, you need to toe that line. Like, don't make it so it looks like every other cover, but it needs to be enough that someone will pick it up over every other book there. So it's like, consider there's like that fine line that you don't want it so out of the genre that it looks like it's like a Western and it's a sci-fi novel. But
right, so your target audience walks right past it.
Yeah.
On the way,
Western sci-fi.
So.
In which case, you got to have a robot arm on the gunslinger on the front. So
Of course.
Make them take a second look at it. So.
Yeah. Which again, I think with both like Audrey and Jayme's covers, who I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, like Jayme's cover says like thriller. That's the cover of it looks creepy. It sets an atmosphere. In Audrey's there is a woman and a large tentacled thing coming out of the ocean. I'm thinking fantasy. They're both, but they also stand out. I think that's exactly what Rue was saying. Like they tell you this is this. If you are looking for this sort of book, it is that sort of book. And yet it looks a little different than the book sitting next to it, which again is a fine balance, and it might be something you can do. But if you can't, it's there's a lot of options. You can do it within whatever budget you have, whether that's $5 or $200, or do it all yourself. Speaking of doing it all yourself, the elephant in the room is sales. So all the technology that's made self-publishing a novel so easy also means that self-publishing a novel is easy. So the market is flooded with books. On the other hand, not necessarily flooding your book towards the readers and the audience who want it. So finding readers and selling books, which may or may not be the same thing, is in some ways harder than writing or publishing the book in the first place. And I know we've all struggled with this. Does anyone have thoughts or ideas on what you've done to sell your books, where you've had success, where you haven't had success, what does success mean?
I think success is dependent on what you personally want. For me, I wrote a list of things that I wanted to accomplish. They were all very modest. I was really, really fortunate that I had an insanely unpredicted reception in the beginning. My pre-orders were insane, just absolutely insane. And I don't know what I did to, I have no advice for how that even happened. I think it was just like lightning in a bottle, whether I wrote something people wanted to read or I happened to make the right connections. I'm not entirely certain, but I've had great success on Twitter. I think because there's a lot of like-minded people on there. And so not only is it great for networking, but there's a lot of this reciprocal, like I have a book from absolutely everybody on this panel, that just happens. And I will never not do that, because if I meet somebody and I like them and I like what they write, then I'm going to go ahead and pick up the book. Without question. I might not get to it right away because I don't have the time to knock through a gazillion books, but I do own a ridiculous amount of books from other authors on Twitter and the writing community. The area I've had the least amount of success in is Facebook. And I think it's because you get a lot of really like haughty people on Facebook. It seems to be a different level of ego there. And it's just really tough. I've joined a bunch of writing groups on Facebook and they all rub me the wrong way. It's all either my way or the highway, or I can do this better. You're doing X, Y, and Z wrong. But I've had good success on just about every other platform. TikTok took off for me. I had a lot of success there. I'm trying to think of what other socials, but Twitter was big, TikTok was big, Facebook not so much. My website got a lot of traffic with ads and people maneuvering through my website. And then as far as if you run sales for your book, if you're doing like the 99-cent sale on KDP or free, I would recommend Fussy Librarian. You have to pay for it, but it is remarkable how many books you can churn through. And it's cheap. So it's not something like BookBub where you may or may not get picked up and it's like $100 plus. Fussy Librarian, you can pay like $5 and your book can just churn out like 200 free copies. And then, you try to get that return for reviews and things like that. Oh, and Goodreads. I've had a lot of success on Goodreads is the other one. Also a health site, but just because a lot of people can be clicky and it's easy to leave a review that you haven't read the book, you can just add a review on there. And so you get a lot of people that gang up on other people. It's kind of like a version of high school, but that's what I got from mine.
I can say as primarily a series author, part of it is kind of playing a long game. The more books I've gotten out in a single series, the better they've gotten. They've started to take off and gain momentum. My primary series, I have 6 books out in now, and it's just kind of starting to pick up speed. So you kind of have to wait until you get some out before you really see a lot of results on it. You'll get a few sales, a few reviews at first on the first few volumes. But once there's a sizable amount out there, people will be browsing around and will see, oh, there's 5-6 books in this series. I can pick up a whole chunk of content at once, and you'll start to see stuff start to roll in after that.
I am also a series writer. So what BK said is absolutely correct. The more books you have in a series, the more successful you're going to become. Not just because you have more books to sell, but because readers who enjoy series, which is a huge chunk of readers, they see that you're prolific. They see the promise of future entertainment, and they feel secure in giving you a try. I read a really good book recently called Romance Your Brand, Building a Marketable Genre Fiction Series by Zoe York. And now she is a romance series writer, so some of the stuff to me speaks a little more towards the romance genre, but the majority of her advice applies to any genre. For instance, her husband writes a book series about zombies, so a lot of the stuff works for him. But the biggest tips that she gave is don't market at first. Don't sink a lot of cost into that first book, which is a big mistake I made. Learn from me. Don't worry about that. Worry about making the best possible products possible, because that's what it is. It's not just art. If you're selling it, it is now also a product.
Yeah, so spend the time writing more books.
Right. Spend that time writing more books. Spend that time making sure that it's going to be the best book that you can possibly make. And then once you have some backlist, then you can spend it marketing. My first series is a trilogy. It's over. If I knew now what I knew then, I might have outlined it to go on longer. But because I've created a reader base with this trilogy, I'm looking at creating a Kindle Vella series based off of that universe. And I've gotten some good feedback so far from the people that have read the entire trilogy. So yeah, I definitely recommend series. I recommend once you have enough of a series, 3 books or more, making that first book free. When I made my first book free on Barnes & Noble and Amazon, within 2 days, I had over 500 free downloads. And it boosted my rankings on Amazon and things like epic fantasy, which is a big genre. That's not a niche genre. It boosted it up like a ton. And that gets it in front of more eyes. I have not had one day since I made that first book free where I haven't sold a book. Not one day. And yeah, it's not paying the bills yet. But like BK said, it's a marathon. This is not a sprint. If you expect to be successful right away, I'm so sorry. That's probably not going to happen unless you're really lucky. But if you really love writing and you want to keep up with it and you take advice and you tweak what you've done wrong, eventually you're going to see gains. And I'm starting to see that now.
And I would say, like, on that note, like, you have to think of it differently than you would think of traditional publishing, where traditional publishing, the first few months, like, that's where you make your sales. Not necessarily the same thing with self-publishing. Self-publishing, the book release has like a long tail of sales. Like, it's over a long period of time. Yes, you have like that initial, like, with a pre-order, but if you decide to do a pre-order, but like, it's an accumulation over time of sales, especially if you're releasing more books, even if it's not a series. Like, I don't do series personally, except for like the Kindavella, the Dragon Warden that I do. I do one-off books, but even then, like, the more books I release, like, the more backlog I have, the more of a reputation I have, the more that someone can think, well, I like this author, what other books do they have? So just remember, it's not like the same as traditional publishing where it's a 2 months is the only sales you're going to get kind of thing. So
yeah, again, I think I agree with what most people said. In fact, that's why I initially started this, because I wanted to be able to have a series. I have a book that I've written that was one-off. Like, if I wanted to self-publish something, I wanted something that I could at some point make the first one free, sort of as Audrey said, but you can only really make it free if there's something else. The only point of making it free is if there's something else for the people to buy afterwards. I think whether that's a series or just another book by you, I think, yeah, both the more writing, you're perfecting your craft, but it's advertisement for the fact that you are a writer who has more books out there. I know personally, like, as readers, we tend to want to go to our favorite writers for more books. Like, that's the best thing to do. Is you finish a book and you immediately like, what else have they written? So I know it's not there's not an easy answer here for anyone who is hoping for that miracle, because I'm in a bunch of self-published authoring groups, and I have not yet had someone come and say, "Oh my God, guys, this is the ad you have to run because I sold 10 billion books." It is there's a few free promos, there's a few great things. I just jotted down. I had not heard of Fussy Librarian, so I'm going to have to try that out. I have used Book Barbarian. I had a pretty successful one for Octanton. Which again, so it was a 99-cent sale. I think it was around 25 or 30. They had options, but I went for a cheaper one, and we got actually a number of pretty good downloads off of that. But yeah, it's less about those sort of initial sales, because we also, anyone who's given away free books, a free book doesn't necessarily turn into a sale, especially because if it's on like an e-reader, downloading a free book is an easy thing. I have a lot of free books that I have not myself read, which means I haven't actually clicked on the link to buy the author's other books. So yeah, I think having those books out there that's not it's not an easy magic bullet, but it's what you got to do.
I think this is another way, like they say, if you want to be a good writer, be a reader first. If you want to be a good publisher, be a reader first. I mean, if you're thinking from the perspective of a reader, you can figure out what it would take to sell you a book. For instance, my daughter read this book the other day that was the first in a series about a little girl who, it turns out, she's actually a fairy, and she's 6. So when she's reading this book to me at bedtime, I got very excited. I wanted to encourage her to do that more. And I was on Amazon immediately afterwards looking for anything else by this author.
The whole series,
The rest of the series. I was looking for more. I was disappointed that there wasn't that much by that author. So, if you think like a reader, in your audience, you can find some stuff maybe you haven't even heard of and give it a try.
And that's what I'm, as a reader, and a writer, what I'm looking forward to is a hopeful return to more live events as well. Because I started my self-publishing journey at the very end of 2019, and then started my publishing journey in the midst of COVID, and therefore I have been unable to take any of my books to a live signing at Barnes & Noble, a small bookstore, or a convention of any kind. And I know that personally, as someone, that's often where I'll be walking past a table and go, "Ooh, that cover looks good," and someone's like, "It's my book." I'm like, "Well, I'll buy that from you." So I'm looking forward to personally being able to get a table at the Brooklyn Book Fair next year and have a stack of Skullgate stuff and my books, and hopefully glad hand and smile and smooze and give out some bookmarks and sell some books there, because that hasn't been an option for a little while. All right, does anyone, so we are almost exactly at an hour, and my philosophy was, although we don't have to turn the room over to someone else because it's a virtual convention, I think an hour is enough of our time. My kids have been good and not harassed me this entire time, and at some point they're going to want a snack or something. So I was going to wrap things up. So if anyone has any closing thoughts and or just where can we find you online? Again, all of this will be in the YouTube, the notes on the YouTube description. I'll have all the links in people's social medias. But if people want to go around, where can we find you online? Where can we find your books? And where can we find you on Twitter? And we'll wrap up.
You can find my website at bkbass.com. And you can find me on Twitter at b_k_bass.
You can find me at ruesparks.com. I'm also on Twitter at Sparks Writes and Instagram at Rue Sparks.
And was there an underscore in your Twitter? Is it Sparks_Writes or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think so.
How often I write my own username.
I was putting it in the comments, and I just wanted to get that. Audrey.
Yeah.
Audrey, you want to go next?
You go? No. Okay. I don't know. You can find me at A.R.K, Horton, arkhorton.com. You can find me at Twitter at arkhorton, TikTok at arkhorton, Facebook, arkhorton. I like to make things really, really easy. All links to any place you want to purchase any of my books including the Skullgate books I've contributed to, can be found on my website.
Nice.
I am JaymeBeanAuthor.com and at Jayme Bean Author everywhere: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. If you go to my website or the link tree in any of my social bios, you will also find a link to my book and the Skullgate books, and different interviews I've done, different random projects I contribute to. It's all there.
And last, I am, again, Chris Vandyke. I am cvandyke.com is my personal website, which has stuff about the books that I've self-published in my middle grade fantasy series that is coming out in November. And I tweet at About Running, and then skullgatemedia.com and at Skullgate Media. So I've been typing for everyone else while they talk, and I have to type while I talk to you. Skullgate Media, Skullgame. And Skullgate Media everywhere else, mainly Twitter and Instagram. We had a TikTok, but I'm bad at TikTok, so don't expect anything from my TikTok. But skullgatemedia.com, you can find some anthologies that include BK, Audrey, and Jayme in it. And yeah, so thanks for coming by. Thanks for coming to IBEON, and thank you all for being part of this panel. And we'll see all of you on Twitter and around, and everyone else. Thanks for stopping by today. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button.